Welcome to Lessons That Last, where a researcher and a teacher talk about what it means to make a lasting impact on students' lives. They unpack the stories former students shared about their memorable teachers and discuss how we can all make a greater impact on the people in our lives. Here's Julie and Laura.
Hello, and welcome back to the Lessons That Last podcast. I'm Julie Hassan, professor, researcher, and with me is my recovering co-host,
Laura Estes-Swilly, teacher, writer, and apparently destined to be sick all fall this year.
Oh, man. Yeah. So if listeners notice that your voice sounds a little scratchy, it's because you've been coughing a lot.
I have been coughing a lot, and I will try to mute it from our listeners' ears. But if I'm a little slow on the button, I apologize.
And I got a feeling we got a lot of listeners because our listeners are teachers who have caught the crud.
Exactly.
And you were sick this week, and as we're recording this, we're finishing launch week for the Lessons That Last book.
It was such an exciting week for me to be so sick. So I Sunday was diagnosed with double pneumonia and am obviously still recovering. And so those first few days were kind of a blur. Wasn't even really aware that the days were passing. And of course, one of those days was our launch day, and I kind of missed it, but not totally. I tried to stay up with social media and what was happening there, but I wasn't doing a lot of posting because I just did not have my wits about me.
Well, we are blessed with some friends and readers and supporters and podcast listeners who were sweet and posted when their books arrived and just posted their excitement for the Lessons That Last book. So readers, if you haven't checked it out yet, readers, listeners, potential readers, if you haven't checked it out yet, we put together 185 of our favorite stories, sweet, short teacher impact stories, and Laura wrote a reflection for each one. They'd be fun to start your morning inspired, to end your day with some reflection, or if you're a leader or a professional developer and want just a little something to infuse some meaning and sweetness into a meeting, I think it would be a great addition.
Yes, and it looks like this. And I have been bragging pretty much to anyone who will listen about the index that's in the back of the book, which is designed to help those leaders and also teachers who are looking for a specific inspiration on a specific issue, whether it's encouragement, engagement, community, whatever they're looking for. Those stories are indexed in the back. And I'm particularly proud of it because it was such a terrific challenge for me. This is not the way my brain works, but when I look at it, I'm in awe that we were able to create something so well put together and so organized.
It did work somehow, and with the help of our lovely editor-publisher, Lauren Davis at Routledge, who checked it carefully with her detail-oriented eye. It all worked out. Nice. So we hope you love it. The story today comes from that book.
It does.
I don't know if, in your fog, you were realizing what was happening at our house this week when you picked this story, but this week at our house, there was a big App State football game on a Tuesday night, which is weird to have a Tuesday night home game against a rival. A lot of build up to that game. Heartbreaking loss.
Aww.
Like close. So close, but a heartbreaking loss. And lots of, speaking of social media and just all around the town, talk about the team and the game and the coaching and all the things.
I can imagine.
And in the middle of that, the Phillies are trying to get into the World Series. So that's been a little up and down. The Philadelphia Eagles are still 5-0, but, that's been close calls a couple times.
Well, but I think that the Eagles are going to be fine because Taylor Swift is dating the brother of one of those players. Isn't Jason Kelce an Eagle?
He is.
He's the center.
Yeah.
So I think that everything's going to be fine for them.
She's going to bring her.
She's got that
the charm.
The Taylor charm.
That she's dating the brother.
Well, I'm not,
who beat them in the Super Bowl.
I'm not speaking on the Super Bowl. I'm just speaking on the Eagles getting into the playoffs. So,
listener, you have probably guessed that I married a man from Philadelphia. The sports, you can't even say it's fandom. Like, it's beyond being a fan for these people from Philly. It's just
it's
part of
a lifestyle
identity. It's
yes,
fueled by anger and spite, and
as so many things are today. And it's hard to believe, like, when you spend a little time in Philadelphia. Now, I will admit I did not spend a lot of time there, and I certainly was not like in a sports bar during a sport game. But it's such a beautiful, peaceful place. It's just beautiful.
It is beautiful.
And then the fans run on, like you said, spite and anger. And I'm like, chill, look around. Like, this place is gorgeous.
So much history. And
yes.
Philly is great. I mean, they are great people, but they are passionate about their teams. And it's a tough place, I imagine, to be a visiting team because they show up and show out.
I love any town that is all in on their team. Like, for example, I don't know what they were saying in the little breakfast restaurants around Boone, but I can imagine after that game. But that game was on everybody's mind because it's a hometown team.
Yeah.
We don't have that as well in Florida. I think, as in other places, because everyone here is transplanted from somewhere else. Yeah. Everyone is thinking about their home team, and they might support our teams, but they're not the number one team on the hearts of our fans.
Yeah. Oh, and App. I mean, in Boone, it's App football, and a college with a student population of 20,000. There'll be 40,000 packed in that stadium. And I think they've sold out every game this season, but that loss was hard.
I bet.
And I try to remind people because I work with those kids, right?
Yes.
The students and the student athletes, they're so young.
They are.
Oh, they are. They're so young.
We actually, at my school, so of course I'm in a huge school district. So there's no like hometown team like there are in some of the other smaller districts around the country. We have very specific rivalries with very specific neighboring schools. And so last night was our Alafaya River rivalry, where we play to pass an oar. There's a giant oar, and whoever wins gets the oar for the year. And my school got to keep the oar for another year. And so, of course, I wasn't there because this was not going to be out in the elements last night. But I can only imagine how excited the boys were.
Oh.
And I'm looking forward to hearing about it on we don't have school on Monday. So on Tuesday when they return, I'll hear all about it from my players.
A big win feels good.
Yes.
And a big loss hurts. Even though we know they're young and they're learning, there's a lot of pressure on these kids who play high school sports, college sports. Like by the time they're professionals, they're men. I imagine they still feel it. They
can take it, right? The men have been taking it since they were young players. So, I think about the coaches too. Like when you get to the obviously, when you get to professional level, those coaches have been there and done it all. But also some of them are like getting older. And as they age, I just want everyone to be a little sweeter to them. I know that's so unrealistic. But then when you get down in the high school realm, our coaches are young. A lot of them are very young.
And they're teachers for the most part.
They're teachers and they're young men. Our head coach, I think, is under 30. So that's a lot of pressure for all of them.
And it makes us as fans think about how do we love our team and support our team and how do we sort of manage that disappointment in ways that are still supportive to the players and the coaches who are doing their best? I mean, they want to win worse than
they want to win a lot. Yes. Yeah. And I had a friend who was a player at a state school in Florida who was this poor man. He was the kicker. And when you're the kicker, you can win, and I'm putting air quotes, or lose a game. And I've never believed that. I think the whole team wins or loses. If you're going into it where a field goal is going to make or break you, then you've had a problem.
Right. Unless it's 0-0.
Right.
And the field goal is the only.
Exactly. And so this young man missed a field goal. He missed it. And he was reviled, publicly reviled, and not supported in that community. From coach all the way down to paper boy, no one supported him. And so you're talking about a college kid. He maybe 20, 21.
Right.
And they're still growing. Men at that age are still pretty much kids. And so I'm always really super aware of how those kids are feeling when a big loss comes, but then also when a big win comes. They have different challenges associated with them.
Yeah. It's true. And I think we have to think about how we help them, but also how we just help community members put that in perspective, the sport. A little easier for me because I'm not quite that kind of fan that my spouse is, or that some folks are, but we've got to start to think about it's a game, right?
Well, it is. Unless you're talking to my husband or your husband or the millions like them, then it's more than a game. And I think we've talked a lot about some of the cultural shifts in recent America, where negativity has kind of stepped to the forefront and it's us against them almost all the time. And this is just another place that's playing out constantly. If you're wearing an App State shirt and you're in a different town, someone might scream out a window at you. Someone might throw something at you. And that's the way it is. And that's a cultural problem. That's more than just sports, I think.
And that identity. So when we make assumptions about groups of people based on some identity. So at our house, I'm sorry to say that if you're a Dallas Cowboys fan, you are characterized in some certain way.
Yes.
Right? And it's just the same as making those generalizations about any other group of people.
Correct. And that's the fuel that runs the engine of social media. Mm-hmm. And that's the fuel that runs the engine of a lot of people in our society.
Yeah.
So you're right. I think when you talk about how do we guide our kids through that, our students, our children, this whole generation that's coming up bogged down in that level of negativity that's surrounding them, how do we teach them to do better and be better?
Yeah. Well, the story you picked today with Mrs. Peet gives us a little bit of food for thought.
Yes.
She's a great model for how we might think about this. She was, this story came from Cyrus, and he had Mrs. Peet in 4th grade during a year when there was a big football loss, and carries this lesson from her about how to navigate that. And I just think it's so sweet.
It is, and it's the perfect age for this impression to really print on Cyrus. He was 10. When you're 10, you really take things seriously. I'm sure he was wildly swept up in what was happening in his community and was just soaking in all of the emotions. And so he was perfect in that perfect spot for her to really teach this lesson.
Oh, so with that, will you, Laura, read Cyrus's story about Mrs. Peet?
Yes. I grew up in a small southern town, and high school football was everything. When I got in 4th grade, our high school team, the Bulldogs, made it to the state championship. We got out of school early to attend a parade and pep rally before the big game. I'm sorry to say the Bulldogs lost that game and they lost by quite a lot. Heroes the day before, the team and coaches became the subjects of ruthless scrutiny. But that Monday morning, Mrs. Peet, always a source of optimism and enthusiasm, had an assignment for us. She asked us each to write a letter to the players, thanking them for their hard work and for the pride they brought to our town during the season. The assignment forever changed the way I respond to games and to my favorite teams and players. I try to appreciate the excitement of the event and remember how hard the players worked to get there. I try to see the humans under the uniforms. Mrs. Peet helped me to learn that, after all, it's only a game.
Mrs. Peet.
She's so smart.
So sweet. And those poor bulldogs.
I can only imagine how much those letters meant to those kids.
Yeah. Oh, because certainly they were beating themselves up and getting quite a lot of scrutiny is a good word.
Yes.
Quite a lot of scrutiny from the fans. And isn't it so easy to sit on the sidelines and scrutinize? We get that as teachers, right?
Absolutely.
So easy to watch someone else do something difficult and have some things, some feedback, some not always informed or helpful.
I have, on probably more than one sassy occasion, responded to students criticizing student athletes or even student performances of any kind. An article in the school newspaper, the yearbook, the football game, the baseball game, a play, with a question about what they have done in that realm of performance. Tell me about your expertise on the football field. Are you a wide receiver? Is there something that I don't know about you? And I know that that's sassy, but it's also with a thick-skinned senior, like a way to pierce through a little bit. Come on, be better.
Right. And you were talking about sort of cultural shifts and trends. And right now we've got a lot of experts on everything out there behind the computer keyboard and on the social media. They know all about everything, public health, defense,
world,
legal issues,
world problems, the Middle East,
teaching, all of it.
Health. Oh, yeah. So many people are doctors.
A lot of good advice on Facebook.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's hard to sort of funnel through those messages, all of that information for a non-savvy information seeker, I think. Right. I think for young people, it has to be overload, and they either turn it off. I do think that that's a thing, that they just turn it off and they don't pay attention to any of it, or they gravitate toward the one that nurtures their prejudices, because we all have them. Right. And then they soak in that.
Mm-hmm. And neither of those is helpful or productive.
Nope. Actually, counterproductive on both counts. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, I love, though, that Mrs. Peet focused on, let's thank them for their hard work. Like, she just focused on the effort, not the outcome.
Right.
Not the mistakes or maybe the plays well played, although it sounds like it was a pretty heavy defeat.
Yeah. So sometimes they're just outmatched. We were watching before we signed on. Jason was watching the Michigan game, and I don't remember who they're playing because that's how well the other team was doing. And we were talking. He was like, "They're just outmatched. Look at this, the talent." And I said, "Well, but Michigan's D1," and he said, "Well, yeah, so is the other team, but the talent is not equal. And if the talent isn't equal, no amount of coaching is going to necessarily bring them to victory." And so sometimes you're outmatched, especially at a state level, if we're talking about high school.
Right. In size, in athleticism, and, in some schools, kids have grown up with excellent coaching.
I was going to say, in financial backing, right? If these kids played travel ball in this more wealthy area, they're going to be better athletes. That's just the law of numbers, versus kids who are like talented, good players, hard Scrabble, but not with as much experience.
Yeah.
But none of that comes out the day of a defeat, you know? And we forget on the day of a defeat all of the victories that they handed us along the way. If you've made it to state, so I'm in a small southern town, and I was on a journey with our school very early in my career where we went to state semifinals. Well, to get to there, do you know how many games we played? It was December. Yeah. It was district, regional, quarterfinals, semifinals. Like there was so much. And by the time we got to that last game, which we did not win, I felt like they had already given so much. How could we be unhappy with that effort? Like, how could we be sad? And it was a big loss, just like Mrs. Peet's boys. We were outmatched, and that's the way it is sometimes.
Yeah. And sometimes it's just not, you're not at your best for whatever reason, right? Is it Bull Durham when the Kevin Costner character says, sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, and sometimes it rains.
Exactly.
Crash Davis, isn't that his character in that movie? So good.
It's
sometimes
true.
Sometimes it's just not your day, right?
Yeah.
As good as you are, as favored as you are, it's just not your day.
And one of the things I love when I talk to football players, baseball players, and soccer players, those are to me, the ones that are big team sports. Then there's also flag football and lacrosse, right? Those kids can come off of a really big loss, but still tell me what they did. I had a good game. We just didn't get it together. I had this wonderful moment. And so somewhere along the line, they've learned it's not all bad when your team loses. You have to look at what you guys did well. Well, we did really well in this one quarter, or our offense did well. We just had a problem on defense, or however they voice it. I've noticed that our kids a lot of times can find something good that happened in the middle of that terrible loss.
Right. Because there's so many plays in a game.
Right.
You know, there's so many at bats in a baseball game. There's so many plays in a football game that we just characterize it by a W or an L.
Correct.
But it's a lot more complicated than that, isn't it?
Yeah. And you know what that just made me think when you put it that way was of observations, like teacher observations. So I had one on Friday before I got sick, and I've not had an opportunity to connect with that administrator for like some kind of post-observation conversation, but there are 180 days of school, right? And I teach 6 classes a day, 180 times. Those are a lot of lessons. Those are a lot of moments. And some of them are wins and some of them are not. And on the day that I need the big W, did I pull it out? I don't know. But I know I do my best every time. Sometimes we win and sometimes we lose. And sometimes it rains.
It's true. And, you know, think about, like, if you were going to judge a football team off 1 minute of a football game,
right?
you would not get an accurate picture.
Correct.
So the best principals I know are in classrooms a lot.
Yeah.
And sort of checking the pulse and watching and kind of knowing what the trends are in those classrooms so that they have more than just those tiny snapshots on which to base an evaluation.
Yes. But think about if we're talking to teachers all over the country, there are a lot of principals who are not in the classroom all the time. And there are a lot of principals who are relying on that 1 or 2 entry into the room with a focus on evaluation. And the evaluation cycles that I'm familiar with just in counties around us, not just mine, but others too, is there's a focus on criticism. We're looking for something wrong. We're looking for what's right, but we're looking for something wrong as well. And so if they're only coming once or twice, you're right, they're not seeing everything. That makes it the big game, Julie. That makes it, am I going to win this state championship for the year, my one evaluation, or am I going to lose?
Charlotte Danielson, who does so much research on teacher evaluation, always says there are two things that have to happen for feedback to be usable. And one of them is we have to have trust with the people who are coming in and watching and giving us the feedback. We have to trust that they have our best interest at heart, that they want us to do well. And we have to believe they are competent.
Yes.
They know what they're looking at, they know what they're looking for, and that they're going to provide feedback that is on target, right? Mm-hmm. So some of it is that.
Yeah.
Without trust and believing that they're competent to give us that feedback. We remember when in our district a few years ago, they wrote that big Gates grant and got peer evaluators to come in, which was really, like, truth be told, a check on principals.
Right. But it was adversarial.
Oh, it was. And so suddenly teachers are coming in to other teachers' classrooms, teachers who applied to be in these mentor positions to do these evaluations, who may have less competence in the teachers they're evaluating, and there's no relationship, so there's no trust there.
No.
And it was just such a disaster.
It was. That was terrible for morale. And I'm not sure our county has fully recovered from that, to be honest with you. And so what you were saying with Danielson's research about trust and competence, I think that's the key for us, obviously, but then also that might be the key for helping kids through these moments. The people who are criticizing you, are they people you trust, understand what your sport or your performance, and are they people who are competent in that field? And if they're not, you can't hear it. You gotta let it go. If they are, then maybe they have something constructive to say to you. And probably if they are trustworthy and they are competent, they're not the ones saying horrible things anyway.
No.
Right? Because they know they've walked in those shoes.
Right.
That seems
constructive things. Yeah.
Right. That seems universal. That seems to apply for business, schools, kids, everybody.
Yeah. Charlotte was on to something.
Yeah, she had it. She had it right. We maybe corrupted it, but she had it right.
Right. I think she would agree with you on that statement too. We didn't quite implement it the way that she intended that framework to be implemented. And Carly Brooke, who I was her assistant principal, and she taught at my school during that time, and she was one of Kaylin's teachers, like one of the best teachers I know, and really, we all were struggling through that peer evaluation process, and she would say, eat the fish, spit out the bones.
Yes.
So if it's helpful for you, take it, use it. If it's not, let it go. And so maybe between Carly and Charlotte, we've got some insight into people who are trying something hard.
Yes.
And working really hard at it and doing it in a space that's very public, which is the same for teaching as it is for sports. Eat the fish, spit out the bones.
Yeah, I love that. And when you think about all performance, and especially big scale performance, the big game, so to speak, that's something that we could teach the kids that might help them get through it. And then we can teach the ones who are the spectators, who are having the feelings, the fandom. Yes. Because when you're a mega fan and your team loses, I think it's painful. I mean, I think I've seen that in your house.
It has happened more that way than the other way in our house.
Right. And it's painful.
The agony of defeat.
Yes. And so we have to learn as fans to be the fish and not the bones, to be the meat. Oh,
that is good. Yeah. And to do what Mrs. Peet said, like be supportive, thank them for their effort, enjoy the community
reach out.
The fun of it, and then keep it in perspective, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, I love that you picked this story this week. What a perfect week for this one.
I had no idea.
And listeners, don't forget, if you love this story and all the stories we share, please check out the Lessons That Last book, now available wherever books are sold.
Yay.
Have a great week, everybody.
Bye, friends. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope you will subscribe to the Lessons That Last podcast wherever you listen. Give us a rating too, which will help other listeners find us. And don't forget to visit chalkandchances.com for more stories. You can also find more information on Julie's research in books. While you're there, take the quiz to find out what kind of memorable teacher you are. I took it and was surprised by what I found. I think you'll find good food for thought. Let us know about your quiz results. We hope you will meet us here each week and bring a friend to share the conversation.